Hello and welcome back to the Shakey Sonnet Show. I'm Tootight Lautrec, the drag laureate of the Sonnetarium, and here we are once again in the Sonnetarium at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainder section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have a couple of lions on the front steps, soaking up the sun, waiting for summer vacation. Yes, because like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end, for this season at least. And what better way to end a season of the Shakey Sonnet Show than with Sonnet 60. Now, I will say that if you have not yet seen Lukács at A Cruel Reader's Thesis, where he memorized Sonnet 60 and recited it and gave a little discussion about it. I'll link that below so that you can see that. And I will pray to the bards above that everyone takes Lukács' example and begins memorizing and reciting poetry and then talking about the experience, how that informs the way that one understands or comes into greater contact with poetry. That would be wonderful. So thank you, Lukács, and I'm linking that below so that everybody can go and see that. For us today, I am ending the season on Sonnet 60 for a number of reasons. One, because, let's face it, I'm tired. Number two, as we saw in the Ecclesiastes-inspired Sonnet 59, to everything there is a season. And this drag queen's girdle is well past the smell-by date, if you know what I mean. And time to put it in the glue factory and go looking for another newer, fresher experience with binding oneself to be presentable for the lovely people on booktube. And thirdly, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, it has to do with Sonnet 60's peculiar place in the sonnets, the 154 sonnets of Shakespeare's 1609 quarto version, and why it's a good stopping point. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. W.H. Auden has some things to say about the placement of the sonnets in the sonnet series, the 154 sonnet series. And if you haven't yet read it, I would suggest picking up the Signet Classic version of the sonnets because there's a foreword in here by W.H. Auden. This is the edition that was edited by William Berto and Sylvan Barnett. And in addition to that, to get even more Auden on Shakespeare, he had given a series of lectures in the late 1940s, I think 1946, at the New School for Social Research in New York. And one of his students took copious notes and wrote them down, and I think this is a result of it. But there's a section in here on the sonnets as well, and I think it's well worth your time to read those. And in his essays, he attempts to bring the idea of Shakespeare's biography, what little we know of it, to bear on the sonnets. And he says that trying to identify characters, real live characters from Shakespeare's biography in the sonnets is an idiot's game, pointless and uninteresting. But it does make me sort of wonder, what does prompt a poet to write a poem, if not his own experience? And moreover, what prompts a poet to write 154 sonnets and put them in a series? Could it be that it's just a dramatic exercise, something to do while the theaters are all closed because of, say, maybe, I don't know, a pandemic, something like that? Could it be a writer just trying to keep his chops, something that one does on a Sunday, the way that now certain people do the Sunday crossword puzzles? It's challenging, yes, but it's not particularly impossible. But it also was curious reading both of his essays because even Auden slips up while talking about the sonnets as if the narrator in the sonnets is Shakespeare. it's almost inevitable. And I think this is because Shakespeare has done such an excellent job in talking about the human condition in these sonnets that it seems like it's real. It seems like real life. And so we tend up slipping and talking about the narrator as if it really were Shakespeare. And furthermore, Auden goes on to talk about how love and sex and lust and loss, and time and death are interesting because they are all somewhat universal. And sex and love and aging are also very personal and very intimate, and they hold a particular power of possibly shame or exaltation or transcendence. And by contrast, he also says that eating is also universal, but you wouldn't necessarily write a sonnet to eating a sandwich, unless, I contend, you were like Shakespeare and you link it metaphorically with other kinds of appetites, as he did in Sonnet 56. So these are larger universal issues, and they still dip down into the mundane, but they harness it to something even larger. There's an interview, this just reminded me of an interview that was done in 1962, Peter Orr interviewing Sylvia Plath, where she talks about how she could never put a toothbrush into a poem because it's just too concise of a space. But in prose, you can fit the more mundane things in because prose has a greater amplitude, and you're able to put things like toothbrushes into prose. And so that's why she sometimes preferred reading prose over poetry. But all this is just to say that when something is very well done, it can seem real, or at least it can reflect back to us our own experience or something that we recognize in the human condition, the human experience of other people, that's complicated and important in our lives or in the lives of people that we have witnessed. So let's tackle Sonnet 60, which is all about eclipses. Eclipses of time, eclipses of life, the waves, the sun, summer, winter. Sonnet 60. Let me read it first, and then we'll dive right into the pebbled shore that is Sonnet 60. Sonnet 60. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end, each changing place with that which goes before. In sequent toil all forwards do contend. Nativity, once in the main of light, crawls to maturity, where with being crowned, crooked eclipses 'gainst his glory fight. And time that gave doth now his gift confound. Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth, and delves the parallels in beauty's brow, feeds on the rarities of nature's truth, and nothing stands but for his scythe to mow. And yet, to times in hope my verse shall stand, praising thy worth despite his cruel hand. Wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful sonnet. And if you let's just look at the first quatrain. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore. As the waves ebb toward the pebbled shore, Booth points out, I wish this were my original observation, but it's not, but Booth points out that the sense of the lines here mimic the wave-like quality that it describes in the quatrain, each line acting as a new wave of meaning sweeping the other under it until we get in sequent toil all forwards do contend. In sequent toil meaning consequent, sequent one after the other. Toil, which is work of course, all forwards do contend, strive continually to go forward, and it gives the implication of a battle. But it is just like being on the beach where you see the waves rolling in one after the others going out underneath it as the new ones come in. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end. That's quite a nice little diminution also. Each changing place with that which goes before, in sequent toil, all forwards do contend. So it is really quite concisely said. And then in the second quatrain, again, we're at the Bible here, the Geneva Bible, not the King James Bible, but Booth cites Job 14, verses 1 and 2, and this does seem apropos because Job says in Job, "Man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. He cometh forth like a flower and is cut down. He fleeth also as a shadow and continueth not." And in the second quatrain we get, "Nativity, once in the main of light, crawls to maturity, wherewith being crowned, crooked eclipses 'gainst his glory fight, and time that gave doth now his gift confound." So it's that same thing of the idea of something coming to fruition and then being cut down in Job and in this quatrain. And then we get the third quatrain, which is my favorite. "Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth, and delves the parallels." That the rhyme of delve, the internal rhyme of delve and parallel is really wonderful, and you can just see time etching its lines on the lover or the beloved's brow. "Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth, and delves the parallels in beauty's brow, feeds on the rarity of nature's truth, and nothing stands but for his scythe to mow." Just imagine that. Nothing stands up except to have to be mowed down, because we all come to the end. But there are a couple things here that I really, really love. This transfix the flourish. "Time doth transfix the flourish set on youth." Transfix is to pierce through, and the flourish, of course, is beauty. So it's like piercing through the beauty. It's like putting a pin through youth, which, number one, could preserve it, and number two, could destroy it. And it does remind me, I mean, of course, Shakespeare didn't get this, but it does remind me of that beautiful section in Eliot's Prufrock, where the narrator is talking about being pinned like a butterfly. The eyes, and I'm just going to read that for you because I just find it beautiful. This idea of pinning someone to preserve them and yet at the same time destroying them. "The eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase, and when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways, and how should I presume?" And oof, I mean, Eliot, whatever his other problems, he knew how to give a line. Again, this delves the parallels, the whole idea of carving the lines on someone's forehead. And delve in particular, that line, I just love. It literally means to dig. And it could mean the wrinkles in parallel lines on someone's brow. Literally also, it means a parallel is a military trench. And thirdly, it could be the lines that are plowed in a field. And going back to Booth, our dear dirty Stephen Booth, he says that it could be somehow related to a deflowering. He says, "If transfix the flourish is taken as an arcane reference to deflowering, it makes sense." And yes, Stephen Booth, it does make sense if one would like to read it that way. Now, Lukács, when in his discussion, talked about how brow and mow don't quite rhyme. And I, of course, scurried to find as much as I could about that to see if there was some sort of a reason. And all I could find was the footnote in the Penguin edition, which was edited by John Kerrigan. And he says about brow and mow, "Rhymed apparently on a diphthong, including I as in bit, or a, unstressed as in ago, plus you as in educated, southern put." And I have no idea what that means. It does not illuminate anything. So what I'm going to do is, Lukács called it a slant rhyme, and perhaps that's what it is. I'm going to blame it on the great vowel shift and say that that's why brow and mo don't particularly rhyme, but it's still very effective. The whole idea, nothing stands but for a scythe to mow. What a great verb, mow. It's concise, it's complete, it's wonderful. And then we get to the couplet. And yet, to times in hope, my verse shall stand, meaning I hope my verse will stand up to time. To times in hope my verse will stand, praising thy worth, despite his cruel hand. His, not meaning that there's a gender specified or not specified, but his meaning time. Time's hand. I will praise your worth now and hope that my verse stands up to time even if your face won't. Well, how's that for a love poem? So here we've got eclipses all over the place. The waves eclipsing waves, child eclipses the parent, youth eclipses old age eclipses beauty, and on and on and on and on. And it's similar to the to everything there's a season that we saw in Sonnet 59, but it does sound like there could be a bit of an ending. And so do our minutes hasten to their end, which is the second line. It could be our minutes together here right now in our relationship. It could mean our lives, because our lives are but a brief walk upon the stage and then poof, we're gone. So dramatically, I wonder how this could fit into any of Shakespeare's plays that we know. And I could see this to someone talking to a dying lover, or I could almost see it as one of Lear's confidants talking to him in a consolatory way, saying, you're about at the end of your rope, but, we'll all remember you, and you were loved. I could see that. Possibly a warrior going off to war, maybe Antony and Cleopatra. I don't know. If you have a better placement for it, I'd love to hear it. So is there a separation approaching is what I'm wondering when I think about the narrative. We had these homecoming poems or reunited poems. Possibly there's a separation coming. Could this be a breakup poem? I'm done with you, but we'll always have this sonnet. Or it's just we're both human and one day we'll die, so carpe diem. And anyway, we'll always have this poem. It could be like a to his coy mistress, had we but whirled enough in time sort of poem, which I do think that it fits into all of these categories. And narratively, I still think it fits into all of these categories too. But there does seem to be an ending on the horizon. And that is one of the reasons that I wanted to end the season. But also because, as Auden says in his lectures on Shakespeare, he says it's clear that these sonnets weren't so much arranged as they were thrown together higgledy-piggledy. And Edmondson and Wells, if I can get them out, here's Dear Dirty Stephen Booth, but Edmondson and Wells, I'm just going to show it, I'm not going to necessarily do much quoting from them. In all the sonnets of Shakespeare, they've given all the sonnets of Shakespeare in all the plays and even in the 1609 quarto, and attempted to put them in chronological order. And according to them, after Sonnet 60, which they believe was written in 1595 to 1597, they say after Sonnet 60 comes sonnets that were written for A Midsummer Night's Dream and for Much Ado About Nothing. And furthermore, they place the writing of sonnets 61 to 103 before the sonnets 1 to 60. And they place 127 to 154 before that, which I find really quite strange. I'll have to dig a little bit more deeply and see I never really quite got why they say that or what their evidence is that where they came upon those conclusions. But according to them, 127 and 154 sonnets were written between 1590 to 1595. And in 1594 to 1595, 61 to 103 were written. And in 1595 to 1597, sonnets 1 through sonnet 60 were written, according to them. So, which would really put a crimp in my little project here of reading them in order to see how they might pan out in terms of a narrative. But does that stop me? No, it doesn't, because I don't care. They're here, they're in this order, and I'm going to continue to read them as if it were a continuing on series. Now, Tom at LA Books has asked me why is so little known about Shakespeare and the publication of these sonnets, and that does seem to be the glorious mystery of the sonnets. No one quite knows all the circumstances surrounding it, but what we do know is that regardless of whether they were meant to be published at all, regardless of whether Shakespeare himself put them in the order that we have them here, we do know that they were put into this order by someone at some time and published for this particular reason in the 1609 quarto in this order as if they were meant to be in this order. And so I will continue to read them because why not? The sonnets, like the world, are filled with wonder, and we'll continue to pay attention to them at some point in the future. Maybe a good beach read for the summer. I'll take it with me to the beach, and when we come back, we'll delve a little bit more deeply into the 61 through 154. Until then, and I am dead serious about this, there is wonder everywhere. Pay attention. I'm Tootight Lautrec.